Weekly Download, a podcast about interesting games, industry news.
Brought to you by Big Games Machine.
I don't know if you've played the original Resident Evil. Why would you at this point?
You know my thoughts on Resident Evil games. Come on.
I know, but in the first game, the first time you go down this corridor, all these spoilers for a game from 1996, these dogs burst through the window, scare the bejeebs out of you. It's got this soundtrack at the time was cool. When you listen back, it's like, this is weird half techno stuff, which I guess is held up in the games, in the movies. But in the remix, that doesn't happen. You're going down this corridor and you're prepared for the explosion. And then it's like the fourth time you go through. I'm not even sure if you have to have completed something else in the story, if it's just a counter. I can't remember now, because it's been a while since I played it, even the HD remake.
So they switched it up. So everyone who anticipated it happening the first time, they then get through the first one and they're like, oh, and then it gets them.
Well, they leave it long enough that you've been lulled into a false sense of security that it's not going to happen, and then through they come again. You're like, oh. So yeah.
Well, I mean, speaking of things that are going to happen.
Yes.
This podcast is going to happen.
This podcast is going to happen. Yes.
It's happening right now. 2026, the start of a whole new year.
And
Happy
we trick
New Year.
people into a false sense of security, thinking that
this is a Resident Evil
podcast. Last week. Oh, well, that did. It was going to happen last week, and then it didn't. So now we're doing it now. Unexpected.
So we're not bursting through your windows, though. We're not. I was going to say we're bursting into your eardrums, but that has very negative connotations.
Yeah,
we're not doing that. We're graciously arriving. We're here. 2026 is here. The weekly download is back. Obviously, our last episode was running through some of the biggest stories of the whole of 2025. That was a special. Now we're back to looking in depth at the week that has been and taking a look at some of the biggest stories.
We're just one story that wraps up last year.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess that's going to keep happening. Like the reports of last year, the analysis and all those things are going to keep coming out for a couple of months. So I imagine this is going to happen fairly regularly, but I think they're always going to bring something new and interesting to look at, and new insights as to
100%.
what's not only happening in the industry, but also the challenges.
Well, I think some of those stories which we've got today, and I think very quickly, you're joined again by I'm joined by Alex. I'm Tom. We are. I guess we'd call ourselves industry experts at this point, would we? I think so. I think we've got the knowledge.
Yeah. I guess we have to at this stage.
We have to, and we are. But today we are going to be looking at, as Alex has said, a few stories that have popped up this week, but a few of them do look back at last year as a whole. So we're going to be taking a look at Xbox's console sales in the UK. Spoiler alert: things are not looking good. But we're going to be asking: is that a problem for Xbox? Is it kind of what they want, given the direction they're taking? So we're going to be looking at that. We're also going to be looking at this really interesting Sony patent around essentially AI ghost players, and they'll be able to step in hypothetically and help you with tricky parts of a game, good or bad. Wait and see. We'll discuss it. And then the last big story we're going to be looking at today is really interesting. I think it's all about the revenue of the UK games industry last year. Again, spoiler alert, the revenue has gone up. I feel like that's a bit of a given, but it's gone up by a lot. So we're going to be taking a look at that and look at the trends.
Not to spoil things, but I suppose depending on which sector of the games industry you're in, you might not have felt that rise as much as others, or
That's
anyone
at all,
depending on kind of where you are. Yes.
But so the money is being made. Money is being made. So one of the stories which has popped up this week is that Xbox in 2025, it was its worst ever year on record for console sales in the UK. We saw against 2024, sales plummeted by nearly 40% year on year. And the estimated sales of Xbox Series X and S in the UK was estimated to be around 280,000 units across the entire year, which feels quite low.
I mean, when I lived in Japan, there's something that a lot of my stories start with. But like they used to have like the weekly console sales in Famitsu, or maybe it was the monthly console sales in Famitsu. And it was regular that Xbox was under 1,000 units sold, sometimes in just double digits. So to me, seeing lower numbers for Xbox feels not quite as strange. But that does, given where the industry's going, given how much Microsoft is trying to establish themselves as a platform, I feel like this indicates that maybe that in itself isn't resonating quite as well as perhaps they want it to in some regions. I mean, I'm out here in a shed where my connectivity isn't as good as maybe you'd need to be relying on any form of streaming for the games, which obviously Game Pass isn't necessarily, but that's in there for some of the kind of remote play options. But yeah, I mean, the actual flip side of this, and I guess the question that you've got to set it against in the UK is what those Xbox Game Pass sales look like. Obviously, when they put the prices up earlier or late last year, that caused a drop off in subscriptions. But we're seeing more people playing on Steam, so more people have PCs that can play games. And if they're making that move over, then this phase out isn't going to panic Xbox as much as maybe it would otherwise.
We were talking before we started rolling, weren't we, that this Xbox won't, I don't think, be panicking about this, because it's very clear from the direction they're wanting to take the brand that what they care about isn't hardware. They don't care about the people that own Xbox consoles. What they care about, like you've said, is Game Pass subscribers. What they care about is that there were parts of last year where the top 10 selling games on PlayStation Store, 5 or 6 of those games were Microsoft published titles. I think, to me, what's funny in a way is it feels like we're seeing Microsoft and the Xbox brand almost get Sega-fied, where there was this time where Sega was very much a console manufacturer. Nintendo and Sega were huge rivals in the hardware space.
Remember,
and then
Sega
realized
what Nintendo don't.
Exactly. We need a new version of that. We need a new version of that. Well, in that case, that was going third party. That was what Nintendo owned.
Ultimately.
But yeah, so you're seeing, I think the trouble for Xbox is that rising price of Game Pass. We've also seen that the systems are going up in price a lot more than other systems are, which are also, PlayStation has had some price rises. But
I think there were 2 price rises to Xbox for Xboxes last year. And that's and let's not discount, like, if you're looking for a new system and you're not like specifically locked into Xbox, the price, whether it's valid or not, or whether it's going up in line with other hardware, those 2 steps are going to make it look more expensive because it's more than where it was. Whereas Switch 2, which came out in that same window, can benefits from coming in at whatever price it wants to, and that's its value. You're not kind of seeing that creep up. It's like, oh, that doesn't feel like a deal when Xbox is going up, whereas Switch is just there at whatever cost it is, and they can spin whatever narrative they want around that. So if you're looking at buying somebody a new console in any given window, suddenly the Switch doesn't have that legacy of this is no longer a bargain to hold it down. Switch obviously did incredibly well as a separate thing.
And obviously the Series S was very much being sold as the value proposition, less power, but it's a cheaper option, a cheaper entry into the industry. And yeah, it really feels like the Series S in particular, as well as the X, have just been have really just suffered the consequences of this change by Microsoft. I think it is worth noting the wider context that the console market as a whole has seen a slight dip in sales. Don't quote me on this. I'm fairly sure. I recall that last November was one of the worst performing months for console sales in the US in generations. So it's not for November, yeah, which, typically November is, the biggest month. You've got Christmas, you've got Black Friday, but all the systems did see a drop. But it's very, it is worth noting that Xbox is far and away the worst of those, but that's not a surprise. I think, to me, what's interesting is that rumors and, murmurings point to the fact that they are still making new hardware going into the next generation. It most likely is going to be a PC with an Xbox logo on it as opposed to a console. But I have to think people at Xbox might are looking and thinking, well, why would people buy an Xbox branded PC if they can go and build their own, or if, like we said, you can play Xbox games on PlayStation now, you'll be able to play more on the Switch too, I'm sure. So what is that incentive to invest in Xbox hardware of any kind?
Yeah, but if that PC is running Windows and it's not, it's as simple as, say, the Steam Deck to boot to desktop, and then you can jump into Steam. Putting aside conversations around whether Steam OS will be better for those games at some point if the machine's less powerful, ultimately you're going to have access to both of your libraries in a way that might be easier than doing the reverse on a Steam machine, jumping into the Xbox Game Pass portal. So that's
the Steam machine. I completely forgot about the Steam machine. I am sure we will be talking about that at some point.
Not today, but at some point.
No, not today, but definitely we will. Something else that we are going to talk about today is this story around Sony and this AI patent that originally emerged at the end of 2024, I believe, but it's popped up again this week, and it's definitely worth looking at. In essence, this is a patent that will allow an AI ghost player, is the term I think we'll try and use and probably not stick to. But this AI ghost player will aim to assist players who are stuck or frustrated at a particular part in a game. It very much feels like an evolution of, on the Sony side, the PS5 Game Help, which is quite a feature that came with the PS5 at launch, and I've had a few times where the app pops up when I load a game and it's like, oh, do you want some help with this? But does feel very underutilized. But yeah, this is, again, Alex, this is one that we've all spoken about before. There's always this conversation about difficulty and hints and systems of in-games helping players overcome obstacles. To me, this feels like an evolution of that, but I'm sure you've got a good take on this too, so I'd love to hear it.
Oh, I've got so many thoughts around this. So many. It's hard to filter it down to one. But the bits of at least what I've seen of this read a lot like summoning, because Dark Souls is a great place to go, or Elden Ring, to summoning a ghost to support you in that. Now, that they have draw aggro, they do all these things so you don't have to tank it by yourself. Is it just that? Is it that they jump in as a second player that plays as well as general player data in the world out there? And in which case is it only for multiplayer games? So from a player side, there's that. From the developer side, there's what do they have to do to add it in? Does it have to have second player hooks, or is it just something that Sony puts in? Is it just an option for them to include if they want to? And then from a kind of auteur role, if you're looking more broadly at people like Kojima or arguably From Software, is it something that it's going to be placed upon them as a mandate, like sometimes Sony does when moving into a new generation? It's like, oh, you've got to have the resistance on the triggers and XYZ.
I mean, for the record, more games should have those. As a side note, very disappointed by the lack of DualSense features across the generation. But anyway, I cede the mic back to you.
No. But in that sense, are they going to then be forced to essentially compromise on what they feel the game experience should be? And arguably, they should be forced to compromise if it's blocking it out from people who bought the game and then can't see everything in it. But yeah,
that's the crux of it, I think, isn't it? Is that, I mean, for context, this is still very much, companies file patents all the time that they never use. There's no indication that this is going to be in the PS5 Pro at some point, or the PS6, or there's nothing to suggest that this is something Sony is gunning for and they're going to add. But I think we've definitely seen a progression in terms of how companies approach accessibility and helping players overcome challenges. One of the examples you brought before we started recording was Nintendo in the new Super Mario Brothers games and in Super Mario Brothers Wonder, having these invincibility characters or power-ups which let you just fly through levels. God of War Ragnarok, notoriously, people were very unhappy with the fact that Atreus, I believe the child is called, he would often
I think
help
that might
you.
spoil part of the story if we reveal his full name.
Okay, no, he's not called that. I don't know. I've not actually played Ragnarok, so
Okay, no, he's somebody
who
else.
knows?
Ragnarok. Yeah,
giving puzzle hints out and kind of whispering things to the player to be like, oh, why don't you try that? And then I think that, to me, the most relevant example is in Death Stranding 2, and obviously you spoke about Kojima, so there's that relevance there. There's an option as soon as you start a boss encounter to just skip it. And the game basically treats it as you won. Like it's a, you won button if you just want to go through and skip the bosses. And we see it a lot in, not to call out the Souls community, but there's certain communities of players who are very hardcore about this idea that, if you buy a game, you should have to complete it no matter how difficult it is, and that's part of the challenge and the reward. And I think that's true. But to me, the idea of something like this, I think the accessibility options it opens up is great. I also think the last thing I'll say just really quickly, I also think it's in the interest of the publishers and the developers to look at something like this, because the last thing these people want is players not playing their game because they've got stuck and they're frustrated and they've left it. So I think if you're going to see this added, that might be the biggest reason why, because it keeps people engaged.
Yeah. And, it's a difficult one because, the assumption has to sit with that it's kind of Twitch-based or kind of difficulty-based elements there. And depending on how it's applied, there's a lot of moving parts that obviously this is an early pattern, how it'd be implemented, where it would sit there. But imagine playing like a puzzle game and it's like constantly just filling in the blanks for you. It's like, well, what was the point?
Do you need my help? Don't worry, I'll give you it anyway. Solve the puzzle.
But I remember, but it's games that don't have difficulties, and there's a lot of horror games have story only to kind of, so you're getting the scares and the puzzles, but not the combat, because that is limiting for some people.
I need that kind of mode in horror games, but it's still hard. But there's none of the scary things.
Okay,
that's what I need. I need like if they add that, that's what I'm there for. There's a jump scare coming in 5 seconds, so like look away from the screen. That would be a mode that I'd be there for if they want to. If anyone's listening,
I think with this sits and the Nintendo one that we were discussing, one of them used Super Mario Bros. I can't remember which one, but like it was that, and then Ninja Gaiden's kind of mode. Like if you died too many times back to back, it basically said, "Are you sure you're not?" I think it was
getting annoyed.
I can't remember. You kind of some kind of animal in the Mario one, and then
I think it was a Tanuki. I think it was like an invincibility Tanuki.
It was an invincibility, absolutely. And then they called you Ninja Dog, and everything got much easier. So it was just like it didn't force it on you, but you had to opt out of being like, this is too hard for you, really, wasn't it? Like, own up. So it's weird.
Okay. Don't worry. No one will know.
Yeah.
Like I said before, I think this is an evolution of something we already are seeing. I think I'll end this with, I believe it was one of the lead producers on Doom, the 2016 and Eternal, who essentially he was replying to someone on Twitter about a accessibility thing in Doom Eternal, and he was like, "You're the player, you control which buttons you press," which to me, I think that kind of sums this up. Is it something we're going to see in the future? Maybe. If it is, I definitely don't think that it's going to be forced upon the player. To me, it's an evolution of these hint systems that we've seen for a long time. And I think this is something where so many conversations about AI within the games industry, this looks to me like something that could actually be really helpful. If it opens up games for more people, then I'm all for it. So
and there's I guess the flip side, opening up for more people, all the relevant kind of like from the player perspective, as long as it's easy to implement for the developers that choose to opt into it. Because if it adds a whole, if it adds months to
another GTA 6 delay to add in the ghost player mode.
yeah, exactly.
November 2027, it's too hard. But Yeah, I think this is one that we'll have to keep an eye on, but I don't think you'll hear much about this for years, I imagine. But the
Probably
pattern,
not until at
pattern is
least
there.
the next console generation, just so that the power's there internally on the machines.
No, maybe that's
at
Xbox's
least.
plan. They're going to add this mode, and then even if people don't buy the hardware, they can play through the games really easily. So we'll take a look at this third story because we're going to look at some data now.
Stories.
Yeah, true. Just circling around the UK. Here we are. So yeah, UK games revenue. Interesting stuff. I think there's always some interest in this. It's always nice to know if the industry is doing well as a whole, doing poorly. Obviously, we'll all point to things within the industry maybe not looking amazing in some ways, but the facts are that...
Before you lay out the facts, I think one of the interesting things about the UK games industry is we're one of the few, I think, that still report box sales over other formats. So it gives whether it's applicable across globally, I don't know, but it's interesting
but
to
on
see how that
box
differs.
sales, Alex has mentioned that. Alex has mentioned box sales. Don't get your hopes up. It's not looking good for box sales. So if you're a fan of physical games, you're in trouble. But before we get to physical games, the wider data. So the industry in 2025 revenue grew 7.4%, hitting the lofty heights of 5.4 billion. I think, to me, the most interesting part of this story is when we pull things back. Since 2016, the UK games industry revenue has outgrown GDP in the same time by 7 times, which feels kind of crazy. I think for years now, people have gotten around the fact that gaming is becoming the biggest form of entertainment, but then things like this really do solidify that. 2025 was also saw the biggest growth that the industry has had in the UK since 2020, which we won't get into that, but there's very obvious reasons why 2020 was quite a big year that we don't need to look back on.
Yep.
But even more interestingly,
performed incredibly well, boosting the entire games economy.
Yeah, it must have been a great year. The games were doing great. It must have been a really good year. But I think, and I'd love to hear what you think about this, Alex. What really I found really fascinating about this was that mobile revenue grew 9%, but it now accounts on its own for nearly 36% of the entire market in the UK. So really, that is a huge driver of revenue. We already know that the players are there. We already know that the games are there, but we're now seeing more and more proof that the revenue is there too, and it's a massive component of the industry in the UK, as well as, lots of other countries. But I think people maybe typically would think that the UK would be a smaller country with mobile revenue, but it's right up there, and it's such a huge part of it.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, and it's a difficult thing to judge as well, right? Because more people are becoming more exposed to gaming and engaging with it more, both through access of having phones that use it, of just it becoming more normalized. So people find it's advertised, they fall into it. And then also through everything mobile games do to keep you coming back, says I, who recently fallen deep into another
Which one? Come on,
game.
We can all share.
Resident Evil Survival Unit. There's a reason I keep coming back to Resident Evil at the moment.
Thank you, Alex, for sharing. My mobile game addiction is Pokemon TCG Pocket. I'm glad that we can bridge the gap and share our not shame, but our hidden love for a good.
Absolutely.
But that's why, isn't it? It is
for the mobile side. Absolutely.
Yeah, there's so many of these games that, we're seeing on the other side of this, we're seeing lots of big publishers and big developers take their IP and start looking at transmedia entertainment, looking at films, looking at, TV and all these other adaptations. But mobile games was the first example of that in a way, where companies started switching on to the fact that if they put together a decent mobile game, there was huge opportunities for their IP, and data like this only says that it's going to keep on happening. I like Pokemon TCG Pocket. The amount of time that goes into the development of that compared to the revenue will be, ridiculous scales of multipliers. So, the mobile shock horror, mobile games are massive. They're here to stay. They're making a lot of money. What isn't making money, and it's you had to start with this, and everyone was like, oh, boxed games, exciting. Boxed games, the sales of physical games fading quickly. There was another 1% dip in 2025, so it now only represents 5% of total revenue. EA Sports FC, on another note, that's the biggest seller in the UK, but even that, most of these games it's digital sales from stuff that...
Yeah, I mean, I sold the majority of my physical media, bar some things that I'm, pretty attached to. Yes, they're Resident Evil themed in a kind of like, yeah. I don't think they're good is an overstatement, but I do enjoy them. Little difference. But I've moved away from them. I find, obviously as download speeds have increased, as just like, especially with things like the Switch and the Steam Deck, I don't want something physical. I want as much as I can crammed into that thing as possible. So when I'm out of cert, or like when I'm traveling, it's all there. So I've kind of moved away from them. Also, the idea of speculatively gathering games so they go up in value in years to come doesn't make sense anymore, because everything's so popular and so mass produced that it's going to be a real rarity that happens. It's like that weird thing that happened with comic books for a while, where it was issue 2 that always became the more valuable, because every collector went out and bought out issue 1, and they was like, it was not going to bother, and then issue 2s went up in price. So it's that kind of thing doesn't happen anymore. And I think when I was young, it wasn't something you even considered, and it just, if you hung on to it, suddenly it's worth money. But I don't think that's going to be a thing in the future. So I am sad to see it go, but like all of the fun bits of having physical media kind of dipped off. You lost the big box, then you lost the manual in any way, shape, or form, and then
I love how the manual. It always comes back to the manual for me. It's always the manual. There's nothing worse. I'm very like PlayStation. I am pretty much all digital. Like there's a few games that I get physically if there's a real good discount on it before it comes out. The Switch and Switch 2, I love my cases. Physical. I really do. They're a lovely colour. But yeah, every time you open one, a lot of them don't even have inside art on the reverse cover. No manual. So you're right. The appeal of physical media now is that I don't know what the appeal is. It's very inconvenient. It doesn't come with those unless you're buying. We see some companies like limited run games and where they're making these special editions which do include a manual. The honor of having a manual with your game. But other than that, it's very much just, do you want a more inconvenient way to access your game? Oh, if you don't forget to bring that cartridge with you when you fly halfway across the world, then you're not playing it.
You're absolutely done. And the joy for Switch and some of these don't really count for this, but the joy used to be reading it on the bus on the way home. Like, that's the anticipation of getting to the game, and it's all.
Well, what does R2 on the PlayStation 2 controller do in this game? It shoots. Oh. Wow.
Back when I started playing games, they weren't even connected. Like the original manual for Super Mario Brothers was wild by comparison. Some poor guy in Nintendo America just making up what the thing was all about.
It was just like hitting just keyboard, just typing out random letters.
Predictive text of manual.
I think there's very much like the negativity, or like the sadness of that. I think what else is interesting from this data is that even despite this really heavy shift to digital, 45% of revenue came from people buying games. So that's not through subscriptions. It's not PlayStation Plus or Game Pass, which, and again, not game related, but I think we can look at data. So 45% of gaming revenue is from that individual purchasing of games. Whereas for individual purchasing of I know you've got a good point on this. I'll just present the data and then you can. 45% for gaming, 16% for music, and 7% for video. So we're seeing that music and video is overwhelmingly in the world of Netflix, of subscriptions, of Spotify. People don't own those things. And I'll let you speak now because I know what you're going to say. So I'll be quiet. But that's the data, which tells its own story. I know
and I
you've
think
got
that-
a good
Yeah,
thing
I
to
think
add.
the data tells quite a large story. But the thing to remember, I think there's two parts. One is that the two things that are kind of more video and music, they both exist in a place where you use them on the go a lot more. Yes, you do with mobile games. Yes, you do with some streaming game services. But ultimately, people that are gamers are playing like a bigger thing that they can't stream and can't get another way effectively. So of course they're kind of purchasing the game. The flip side of that obviously is that they're not purchasing the game, they're purchasing a license to play the game on absolutely every format they look like.
Alex with the asterisks. With the
Apart from
little
that tiny
actually.
fraction of people that are buying the physical ones, but even they're in a weird place now when it comes to actual ownership.
Here we are. Yeah, until all the servers die in 20 years and you can never access the actual good version of the game that you bought because it's on a patch that isn't on the
and
the
I'd
cartridge.
be interested to know, actually, because obviously this isn't reflected here, what percentage of those music sales and video sales are driven by physical hardware or physical editions. Like, how many of those are the Swifties buying however many editions of whatever her last album was on every kind of vinyl, so they've got the full collection. Like, I feel like that entire what was it, 16% could be driven by that alone. And how many is just like, oh, I wanted to see that movie, now Superman's on Prime, I'll pay I'll buy the digital version.
Well, unfortunately, we're not a music or video podcast. We're just a games podcast. So that could be people's homework. If you're interested, go away, try and find the data, tell us, and then we can have that conversation. I think for the sake of time, we're going to have to move on.
Yeah.
But interesting to have that look at the UK. Obviously, that's just the UK, but I'd imagine that we'll see, especially in the West, I imagine we'll see similar trends. We'll definitely keep an eye out for when more of that data comes out. And if we see it, we can bring it back and talk about it again. Because it is interesting. It's interesting to see how people are consuming games, how people are playing them, how much money they're making, where all that money's going, what parts of the industry it's going into. Before we finish today, we'll do our little, I think this is it's always our favourite thing, I think, is to look at a few silly stories. There's no Nintendo fan art in this one. Sorry, Alex, but what we do have is this story I found about graded 3DS consoles and people having a real back and forth about whether it's a bigger question about the nature of grading games and memorabilia and putting them into boxes to never be opened again, and what the value of a 9.5 out of 10 is and all those things. But it turns out that a lot of people on the internet who are gamers are not a fan of this. And I know you've got your 3DS that maybe you'd get graded, maybe not. But
I mean, it's in a little shell case, so I'm sure it's still in pretty good nick. But screen yellowing, there's things you can't control in this equation, obviously. But
I think
it's wild to me that this is where collecting has gone. Like, I guess it makes sense, but ultimately, I'm sure this is built in. I'm not deeply into this. In fact, I think John probably knows more about it through Pokemon cards than I know about it at all. But the money you've got to pay to get something graded is so kind of weirdly prohibitive, unless it's really going to soar in value. It confuses me.
Yeah, it's a really big thing with Pokemon cards. I play a lot of TCG Pocket because I'm like, it's like the opposite of a gateway. Like, that stops me from buying the physical cards. But I see a lot of stuff with the physical cards where it's like, oh yeah, if you get this card's worth $10, but if you get it graded and it's a 10, it's worth 20. And I'm like, but how much does it cost to get it graded? And I think, again, something we were talking about before we started recording, I understand the value of grading with older games. So if you've got a mint condition copy of Super Mario World on the SNES with box and manual and cartridge, I can kind of get that, because it exists now as a collector's item to some people. But I see a lot of people who are getting a copy of Super Mario Odyssey on the Switch and they're putting it in a glass case, and I'm very confused.
That is weird. That is weird. But I think there might be at like a certain age and thing there where putting it, I don't know how preserving the thing it's encased in is for it, in terms of like it's already been exposed to air. Like if you're putting it under there.
Is it like that Big Mac? I don't know if you've ever seen that story.
Yeah.
Someone put a Big Mac into they injected it with the like silicone,
Resin,
and it's
yeah.
just it just exists. Maybe that's what's next. We're going to start injecting like SNES controllers with silicone and letting
But
them.
I do wonder, like, if you've done it and you've had this, and it's like, okay, if I do this now, that is then it's grading for life. It doesn't, like, theoretically, it's in there, it's sealed. And I don't know. I think part of the reason things are so expensive to get done is because there's an insurance level as you send it and things like that. But if it's in there, that's what it is. It's now a 9 or whatever it was. And I know somebody I sold a game to was like, yeah, I keep buying this same game, and one day I'm going to get an over a 9 for its grading. So he's just buying them and sending them off bulk.
How many are you buying?
I wasn't buying it.
I've bought 500 copies of
it was
Conker's Bad Fur Day, and I'm determined to get a good one.
It was a GameCube edition of the Legend of Zelda Master Quest, which was a mail-off giveaway to Nintendo.
To be fair, that actually is quite I was going to say that's quite a good one.
It dipped a lot in value, but he was buying a lot to do that. So he had like...
Probably because he was buying them all. That's probably why it dipped in value, because he'd bought every one and just didn't sell it. But yeah, just something funny. As always, we always put the links to these stories in the description. I appreciate these less serious ones. Sometimes people might be more interested in looking at them. I think the other one we were going to...
The only card I vaguely got graded is locking in my Nintendo museum. We love that one. There. So yeah, he sits here proudly.
I thought you were going to grab the Game Boy again.
No.
But no, not today. Keep the Game Boy on the shelf. Same as mine. I think you can... I've got my middle aisle, which is slowly just filling up with more Nintendo things.
It's growing.
But on the topic of Lego, I didn't even think about that. But yes, this new Lego Smart Brick, this is something you pointed out to me earlier this week, Alex. Yeah. Very interesting. This fancy new brick from Lego that can make noises and do all these different things, and it's launching in March with a Star Wars set. And I think what's interesting with this is that it feels like this is Lego's attempt to... We've seen Lego over the years. We've had Lego video games. We've had Lego embracing more video game IP into its sets. And there's the Mario series sets where they have the special bricks that make the characters make certain noises. But this feels like a real big step from Lego in terms of bridging the gap between a Lego set and a video game, and that interactivity that goes beyond, I know obviously you're a bit older than me, but for me, growing up with Lego was still very much like you build the set and then you sit in your bedroom on Sunday afternoon and you're making sword noises and it's all about the imagination. Whereas now the noises are included.
I mean, let's be honest here. Lego's for kids. Adults should not be buying Lego and building sets and then not being creative with them and leaving them on displays behind them. So really the issue
we're authorities to speak on that matter.
Yeah, that's exactly us. So with that in mind, there is a question as to whether this is robbing Lego of some of its kind of core appeal, which is kind of education, creativity. Like when I was a kid, there were like little robot ones that you could program, but that was like literally like part of a computer and all sorts of things. But it always came back to it's not locked into something. It can be repurposed. And these arguably don't feel like that. But at the same time, it's only going to be in some sets. And things like all of these could probably not benefit, but add some value to people who are just building to collect them and display them rather than them being these creative toys. So this article was, I think the article that you're going to link on was on the BBC, and it kind of said like, it was worrying some people, but I think it can exist between places. Like you can still buy the Lego sets for kids to be creative. It's not taking anything away. It's purely additive to the experience.
Yeah.
People
and I think it's interesting to see this experimentation. I see the appeal of like those Mario sets. I always think to myself, I want to buy one of those so I can get the Mario to interact with the NES because I know it makes the noises. Do you have one?
I don't have a Mario, no.
But that's the only reason why I'd want to get one. But I get the appeal of that. I think it's yeah, I think we included this just because it is interesting to see Lego over the last few years, especially, has very aggressively, tried to place itself more into the video game sphere. And
I mean, there's very quickly to rattle them off. You've got Horizon, Animal
Mario,
Crossing, Sonic, Mario,
Zelda.
Zelda, of course, you say with that there. So a lot of those are Nintendo, but they also had the Atari console, the Pac-Man console. So yeah, it's appealing to that market. So broaden it out still further.
It's appealing to us. All mine needed dust, to be honest. But anyway, we'll wrap things up there. You don't want to hear about my Lego that needs dusting. But the Deku Tree will be a nightmare because it's got so many tiny little pieces that need a proper duster to do that.
That you get between your keys.
Yeah. Anyway. But yeah, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Alex, for joining us for this first episode of 2026. Run off all the usual spiel. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether you're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, if you're watching on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe. We do these every single week, every Friday, so you can get a rundown of some of the biggest stories of the week. If you're someone who's thinking, I like to stay informed, but I like to read my news, well, great news. We've also got a weekly download newsletter, which is available via LinkedIn. You can find that in the description down below, or wherever you're seeing this, you'll find a link. And we've also got, for those of you who want even more news every day of the Monday to Friday work week, we've got the daily download that's straight to your inbox every day. I can guarantee you that's great because I write it. So, and you can trust me, it's always good. It's always great stories, and it's a great way to stay informed on some of the biggest stories which are happening in this industry, which never seems to quieten down. There used to be, I feel like in the past there was periods where things would be quiet, whereas now every day something big is happening, and you want to make sure you're staying informed of that, and that's by subscribing to the daily download. But other than that, thank you so much for downloading. We'll be back with more stories and trends next week, and we'll catch you then.